elements using CSS is CSS one of the most powerful features, and in this video we will be studying how we can position different HTML elements using the position CSS property. So let us get started with iDigitalPreneur. Now, the position property, in essence, it is used to specify any HTML element's position in the DOM flow. So let's say you have defined different HTML elements in a flow, and now using CSS, you want to change their position, at least visually, and you want to place them in different places of the pages. You use the position CSS property for it. And the syntax for the position property looks like this. So we use the position CSS property, and there are 5 different possible values available in CSS for different types of positioning, and we will be seeing all of them one by one. By default, the position property for any HTML element that you add is static in nature, and we can use either fixed, absolute, relative, or sticky to kind of change its position in the DOM flow. Let's start off with the fixed positioning, and it is as simple as it sounds. It is used to fix the position of any element. So let's say there is a particular HTML element, or there is a particular group of HTML elements that you want it to be fixed at some part of the page, and you do not want them to change even though we are scrolling down or kind of going to other parts of the pages. For that kind of an effect, we use the fixed position property. So let's see this in action, and I have already created like a basic HTML. There is a div, a simple box, and then there is some paragraph. Now what I will do is, let's create a banner. We'll try to recreate an e-commerce banner of a sorts, which kind of shows that there is a 10% discount on the website going on, and that is going to be a consistent fixed positioned banner. So for this purpose, I will, let's say, create a div, and I will name its class to be banner, and here I will say that the span, it is 10% off on all electronics, right? So this is my banner which has been created. Now let's give it some styles so that it looks like a banner. So I will say dot banner, and I want to give it a background color of red with a text color of white so that it is much more visible and bright. And let's change this to some other form of red, and I will say maybe orange, or orange red works. And I also want to give it some padding of 0.5 rem so that there is some padding around. And I want its width to be a little bit less. So I will say probably 200 pixels, right? And okay, so now I want this particular banner to be fixed on the top right corner of my page. So how can we do that? So for this, I will first of all specify the position property and give it a value of fixed. And the moment I give it fixed, now you can see that something happened, that the banner is now on top of the paragraph. And just to see visually more, what I will do is I will increase the size of the paragraph, and I will say, I will add some more characters to it. And now you can see that the banner is fixed on the page at its particular spot. We can change its position using the top, bottom, left, and right property. But now essentially my element, my HTML element, is fixed on the page. So I will go back to my CSS, and I want it to be at the top right corner. So I will say that the right needs to be 0. So the offset of right needs to be 0. So it will move to the rightmost part of the page. And I also want it to be at the very top. That means the offset of top will be 0. So now essentially, it is moved to the top right corner of my page. I can specify more values. I can add some pixel values, or maybe some emps and rems value to kind of fine tune the position. But in essence, my banner is now at its correct place. And just to check that it is actually fixed, I will probably add in some more elements here and say maybe and I will see that my element is fixed at the very top of my page. So this is what the fixed position property is all about. Now let's move on to relative positioning, and this is perhaps one of the most important positioning properties in CSS, and it is used to position the element relative to the current position of the element. So wherever the current element is on the page, if we want to displace it from its current position, we use the relative property. So relative property is different from a fixed property owing to the fact that this element does not move outside of the DOM flow, and when you inspect the HTML is still the same from what you wrote here. It's just that the position of the element is slightly displaced from its current position. So let us say that I want to move this box slightly towards the right and slightly towards the left and slightly downwards. So inside of my box parent, which is this box which I have created, I will give it a position of relative. And once I do that, you will see that nothing happens, nothing visually changes. But now I can use the top, bottom, left, and right properties to kind of position the element. So I will say that I want it to be moved slightly towards right. That means I want to give it a offset of left. So I will say left, and I want it moved maybe by 50 pixels and downwards. So that means I want to give a top offset. So I will say top. From the top, it should move 50 pixels down. And now you can see that this element has moved 50 pixels to the right and 50 pixels downwards. Notice the fact that this is not fixed and the element is scrolling along with all of the page. This is the difference between fixed positioning and relative positioning. And as we already discussed that the relative position does not remove the element outside of the DOM flow, which it does in case of fixed and absolute, which we'll study about just right now. But whenever you're using fixed and absolute, remember that the element is moved outside of the DOM flow, and now essentially you can move it any place in the DOM. Now let's talk about absolute positioning, and it is used to position the element absolutely relative to the closest parent, which has a property of relative attached to it. So absolute positioned element moves in relation to the parent or the closest parent, which has a position of relative defined. So for this purpose, I have my div. There is a box child named div inside of my box parent, and I already have some CSS for it. So let me just write that down again. So I will say child, and let's just say this to be 500 pixels. I give it a height of 200 pixels and I give it a width of 200 pixels with a background color of maybe brown. And now you can see that this brown box is inside of my aquamarine box. Now what I want is I want to move this particular box child inside of my, I want it to be moving inside of my box, and I want it to be absolutely positioned. So for this, the moment I give this absolute, right, and before that let me remove the position relative and everything. So now you will see there is no visible difference, but see what happens once I start moving it and moving the box. So now you can see that if I am not giving it a position of relative, and let me give it back. Right now, once I'm giving it a position of absolute, it will search for the closest parent which has a position relative defined. And the closest parent for this div, which has a position relative defined, is its immediate parent, because in box parent, I have defined a position of relative. If I don't define the position relative, it will fall back. It will keep on checking the parent's parent and parent's parent till it reaches the body HTML tag. And as we know that body HTML tags already have a position relative defined for it. So there is no need. It will fall back to the absolutely positioning for the body, which is relatively positioned. Now, it might sound a little tricky, but it is really not. And just to prove my point, what I will do is I will move this and I will say that the right needs to be 0. The moment I give it right to be 0, you will see that the box moved to the rightmost of the parent for which the position relative was defined. If this position relative was not defined in my box parent, right would have moved it to the rightmost of the screen, because for this div, the closest parent which has a position of relative is body. So it is positioning itself to the body tag itself. But because I defined a position relative for the immediate parent, now if I give it a value of 0, the offset will work inside of the parent itself. And I can give it maybe a bottom of 0, and it will move to the bottommost part of the parent, which is relatively positioned. So absolutely positioned and relative positions are used in conjunction with each other. Whenever you're doing absolute positioning and if you're working on nested HTML elements, make sure one of the parents for which you don't want the child element moving beyond that particular parent element, make sure the parent element has a position of relative defined in it. This is what absolute positioning is. And absolute positioning also takes the element outside of the DOM flow. So it does not respect the flow of the DOM. Rather, it respects where the element is being positioned after giving it a position of absolute. Now let's talk about sticky positioning. Now sticky positioning was introduced very later on, and all of these other properties for position were already present in CSS. But sticky positioning, it specifies the position of the element based on the user scroll, and it is basically a hybrid mixture of fixed and relative. We'll see what this is all about, and you will see the use cases once I write down a particular piece of code. You will see where sticky positioning might help. So for this purpose, I will first of all move this left and right, right? And make, let's also remove the banner because I don't really want it anymore. And for the element, let's add in a nav bar. So I will say that that there is a header, right? And inside of my header, there is some text inside. So this is a header, right? And now this header, I will give it some styles. So down here, let me remove the banner one because I don't require it. So for the header, I will give it a width of 100% because I want it to span across the page. I will also probably give it a I will give it a max height. Max height is basically the maximum height it can attain, and it can go well beyond, well below it, but it won't go beyond the maximum height specified. So I give it a maximum height of maybe 100 pixels because I don't want the header to be more than that. And I want to give it a padding of 1 rem. And I also want to give it a background color of maybe blue violet, something like this. And let's remove the padding for now, and or let's give it back. Right now, as we can see, as we are scrolling down the page, right, the header scrolls along with the page, but it is not sticking to the very top of my page. So let's say this was a navigation bar. The moment you scroll down, you want the header to be fixed at the top of the page. To achieve this kind of an effect, you use something called position sticky. And now position sticky actually does not work all of a sudden. You need to add in more properties. So you say that the top needs to be 0 because after defining position sticky, you need to define where it should stick after the user has scrolled that particular element out of the view. So I want it to be stick at the very top. And now see what happens the moment. So this is working fine. The moment this header starts getting outside of the view of the user, it sticks to the very top, and now this element has being fixed to the top of the page. The moment I come back to the very top of the page and this element is now in view, now this will work as relative, and the moment it gets at the very top, it gets fixed. So it is a mixture of relative and fixed, and usually you will see the sticky positioning with header and navs, that once you're scrolling the page, you want the top header to stick at the very top so that the navigation links are easily accessible. This is a new feature, and some of the very old browsers still don't support the sticky positioning. So there is something which you need to worry about. But mostly all of the major browsers right now, including Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, they kind of are compatible with the sticky positioning, so you can safely use them across your CSS file. So this kind of brings us to the end of the positioning elements using CSS. We learned about the position property, and we also learned about how to use the absolute and relative positioning to kind of move elements here and there and maybe achieve a little bit of more control over how the elements are being seen. You can play around with the absolute and relative positioning to kind of achieve something which you were finding it hard to achieve beforehand, because now you have complete control over how you're moving the HTML elements. We will continue our discussion of CSS. Till then, I will see you all in the next video.